Her first day of life became her death sentence when settlers abandoned her among desert rocks for the crime of being born blind. Her desperate cries summoned not the death they intended, but an Apache healer who saw in her unseeing eyes a bridge between two worlds. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The merciless sun of the Sonoran Desert beat down upon the small wagon train as it struggled across the parched landscape. June 1879 had brought record heat, transforming the already harsh terrain into an unforgiving furnace. The wooden wheels creaked in protest as they cut shallow tracks into the baked earth, a sound that had become the constant companion of the 12 families who had left Pennsylvania 3 months prior, chasing dreams of California gold and fertile land. Among them, Martha Coleman clutched her swollen belly as pain ripped through her body once more. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another month. Not here, not in this God-forsaken wilderness with the nearest doctor hundreds of miles away. Her husband Thomas wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes reflecting the same fear that had taken residence in her heart since her water broke at dawn. "Push, Martha," urged Eleanor Wilson, the only woman in their party who had experience as a midwife. "I can see the head now." Martha's scream pierced the desert stillness as she gave one final desperate push. The cry that followed should have brought joy, but instead, an eerie silence fell over the small circle of women who had gathered around the makeshift birthing bed beneath the canvas cover. "What is it?" Martha whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why isn't anyone speaking?" Eleanor wrapped the infant in a thin cotton blanket, her weathered face betraying concern as she examined the newborn girl. "She's breathing well, but what?" Thomas demanded, stepping closer. Eleanor turned the baby toward them. Her eyes, look at her eyes. The infant's eyes remained sealed shut, but not in the normal way of newborns. There was something wrong with their formation, something unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. "She's blind," Eleanor pronounced, her voice barely above a whisper, "born without sight." Martha reached for her daughter with trembling hands. No, it can't be." Thomas staggered backward as if struck. "We can't. A blind child can't survive this journey. We can barely feed ourselves as it is." "She's our daughter," Martha protested weakly, though the doubt had already crept into her voice. The journey had claimed 2 children already, one to fever, another to a snake bite. The harsh reality of pioneer life left little room for sentiment. The camp leader, John Blackwood, placed a heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder. "The wagon train moves at dawn. We've already lost too much time. You have a decision to make." That night, while Martha slept the deep sleep of exhaustion, Thomas made his choice. With tears streaming down his face, he took the sleeping infant from her makeshift crib. He wrapped her in the softest blanket they owned, tucked a small silver cross inside the folds, and carried her a 1/4 mile from camp, placing her gently in the shadow of a large rock formation. "May God forgive me," he whispered, pressing a final kiss to her forehead. "May He protect what I cannot." As Thomas walked away, the rising moon cast long shadows across the desert, bathing the abandoned child in silvery light. The infant stirred slightly, her unseeing eyes still closed to a world that had already rejected her. Above, stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky, silent witnesses to both the cruelty and frailty of human hearts. Miles away, an Apache healer called Running Elk prepared for his morning journey to gather medicinal plants, unaware that his path would soon cross with a tiny life that would forever change his own. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, Running Elk moved with practiced silence through the rugged terrain. At 32, his lean frame carried the strength of youth, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both beauty and suffering in equal measure. The Apache healer wore his black hair in 2 long braids adorned with a single eagle feather, a symbol of his connection to the spirit world and his role as a medicine man of the Chiricahua tribe. Running Elk knelt beside a small shrub, his fingers gently testing the firmness of its leaves. He had journeyed farther from camp than usual, drawn by rumors of rare healing plants that grew in the shadow of the red rocks after the brief spring rains. His leather pouch already contained juniper berries, sage, and desert willow bark, remedies for the fever that had recently visited his people. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the desert wind playing tricks. Running Elk paused, his head tilted slightly. There it came again, a mewling cry unlike any desert creature he knew. Perhaps a coyote pup separated from its mother, he murmured to himself, moving toward the sound with cautious steps. What he found instead stopped his heart. There, partially sheltered by the shadow of a towering rock formation, lay a tiny human infant wrapped in a white settler's blanket. Her face was reddened from heat and thirst, her cries growing weaker with each breath. Running Elk knelt beside the child, disbelief etched across his face. Who would abandon a newborn to the mercy of the desert? He scanned the horizon for signs of white settlers, but saw only the endless stretch of sand and stone. The infant couldn't have been there long. A night in the open would have been fatal. With gentle hands, he lifted the blanket. A small silver cross tumbled onto the sand. Running Elk examined the child carefully, noting her labored breathing and the unusual formation of her eyes. Understanding dawned on him. The baby had been born without sight. Among his people, such children were considered to possess special gifts, their spirits more attuned to the unseen world. Among the white settlers he knew, they were often seen as burdens. "They left you because you cannot see," he whispered in his native tongue. "But there are many ways to perceive this world, little one." Running Elk had lost his wife Singing Bird and their daughter Little Fawn to the spotted sickness 2 winters past. The memory of their passing was a wound that had never fully healed, a constant ache beneath his careful composure. Now holding this abandoned child, something stirred within him that he had thought forever silenced. Without hesitation, he removed his outer shirt and fashioned it into a sling. He placed the infant against his chest, securing her close to his heart, and retrieved a small water skin from his belt. With careful patience, he let drops of precious water fall onto the baby's parched lips. She suckled instinctively, her tiny hands flexing against the rough fabric of his undershirt. "You have survived your first night alone in the desert," he told her. "Your spirit is strong." As Running Elk started the journey back to his people's camp, he felt the weight of the decision he was making. To bring a white child into the tribe would raise questions, stir debate among the elders. But something in his heart told him this child's path was meant to cross with his own, that perhaps the Great Spirit had guided his steps this morning for precisely this purpose. Naltsa, he named her softly, the word meaning she who perseveres in his language. "You will live, Naltsa. This I promise you." The Apache camp, nestled in the shadow of towering red mesas, came alive with morning activity as women tended cooking fires and men prepared for hunting. Children darted between teepees, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. This temporary settlement had been their home for nearly a moon cycle, chosen for its proximity to water and natural shelter from both elements and enemies. Running Elk approached slowly, the infant secured against his chest. The first to notice him was Morning Star, an elderly woman whose gnarled hands were busy grinding corn. Her eyes widened at the sight of the bundle he carried. "What have you brought us, medicine man?" she called, setting aside her work. Others turned at her words, activities pausing as Running Elk entered the circle of dwellings. Swift Arrow, a young warrior with a perpetual scowl, stepped forward with hand raised. "Is that a white child?" he demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. Running Elk met his gaze steadily. "I found her abandoned among the rocks, left to die because she was born without sight." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Cloud Dancer, the oldest of the tribal elders, pushed through with the aid of his walking stick. His face, deeply lined from 90 summers of desert sun, remained expressionless as he examined the infant. "The white man's child," he pronounced, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "Why bring her here? Her people chose her fate." Running Elk shifted the baby in his arms, revealing her face to the elder. "Her people rejected her, but the Great Spirit guided me to her. Would you have me leave a helpless child to the coyotes?" "Our own children go hungry when game is scarce," Swift Arrow countered. "Why feed the offspring of those who hunt us like animals?" Several voices rose in agreement, but others remained silent, eyes fixed on the tiny form in Running Elk's arms. The baby began to whimper, her small hands curling and uncurling against his skin. Evening Rain, a young woman who had recently lost her own infant during childbirth, stepped forward. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she gazed at the child. "She needs milk," she said softly. "My body still provides, though my son walks with the ancestors." Before anyone could object, she took the baby from Running Elk's arms with practiced gentleness. "I will feed her while the council decides." Cloud Dancer nodded once, then gestured toward the council lodge. "Come, Running Elk. The elders will speak on this matter." Inside the smoky interior of the lodge, 5 elderly men sat in a semicircle, their weathered faces solemn in the dim light. Running Elk took his place before them, back straight, eyes respectful but unwavering. "Speak your heart," Cloud Dancer instructed, passing the ceremonial talking stick. Running Elk accepted it, feeling the smooth wood worn by generations of hands. "2 winters ago, the spotted sickness took my wife and daughter. I thought my heart had died with them. But today, when I found this child, I felt it beat again with purpose." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The white settlers left her because her eyes do not see. But among our people, those who cannot see with their eyes often see more clearly with their spirits. This child survived a night alone in the desert, a sign of remarkable strength." Grey Wolf, the most conservative of the elders, spoke next. "The whites bring nothing but death to our people. Their diseases, their whiskey, their broken promises. Why should we care for one of theirs when they slaughter our children?" "Because we are not them," Running Elk replied simply. "We do not measure a life's worth by its usefulness. The Great Spirit sends each soul with a purpose." Silence fell as the elders contemplated his words. Outside, the baby's cries had ceased, replaced by the gentle humming of evening rain as she nursed the infant. Finally, Cloud Dancer spoke. "Running Elk asks to adopt this white child as his own daughter, to give her a name, to teach her our ways." He looked at each elder in turn. "If we refuse, her blood is on our hands no less than on those who abandoned her. If we accept, we welcome an unknown future." As the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows across the camp, the council of elders emerged from the lodge. The tribe gathered instinctively, conversations falling to whispers as Cloud Dancer raised his gnarled hands for silence. Running Elk stood to one side, his expression carefully composed despite the hammering of his heart. "We have listened to the winds and consulted with the spirits," Cloud Dancer announced, his voice carrying despite its age. "The child found in the desert will remain with us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some of approval, others of discontent. Swift Arrow's jaw tightened visibly, but he remained silent. Cloud Dancer continued, "Running Elk will raise her as his daughter. She will learn our ways, speak our language, know our stories. Whether her presence brings blessing or curse to our people remains to be seen." He turned toward Running Elk. "You have asked for this responsibility. Now you must bear it." Running Elk bowed his head in acknowledgement, relief washing through him. When he looked up, his eyes found Evening Rain, who stood at the edge of the gathering with the infant cradled in her arms. A silent understanding passed between them. That night, Running Elk prepared his teepee for its new inhabitant. He constructed a small cradle board from willow branches and soft rabbit skins, singing softly as his hands worked the materials, a melody he had not sung since Little Fawn's birth. The silver cross he had found with the child, he wrapped in a piece of deer skin and tucked into a small medicine pouch. One day, it would be hers to decide what to do with this remnant of her first people. Evening Rain arrived. As the evening fires were being lit, the baby peaceful in her arms after feeding. "She drinks strongly," Evening Rain observed, carefully transferring the infant to Running Elk. A good sign. Running Elk studied the tiny face, the unseeing eyes now closed in slumber. "Thank you for sharing your milk with her. I know your heart still aches for your son." Evening Rain's fingers lingered on the baby's cheek. "Perhaps the Great Spirit sent her as much for me as for you." She hesitated. "I will help you care for her, if you permit it." "I would welcome your help," Running Elk replied. "I remember little of caring for a baby, and nothing of caring for one who cannot see." In the days that followed, Running Elk and Evening Rain established a rhythm around Naltsaya's needs. The young woman would come at dawn and dusk to nurse the infant, while Running Elk learned to distinguish between her different cries: hunger, discomfort, loneliness. He carried her everywhere in a specially designed sling, narrating the world around them in gentle tones. "This is sage," he would explain, holding the plant close to her face so she could smell its pungent aroma. "We use it for cleansing and healing." Even in those early days, he noticed how her head would turn towards sounds, how her tiny fingers would explore textures with unusual attentiveness. By the end of her first moon with the tribe, something remarkable began to happen. The same people who had argued against her presence now found reasons to visit Running Elk's teepee, bringing small gifts, a woven rattle, a soft deerskin blanket, a carved wooden amulet for protection. Even Swift Arrow, still skeptical, paused one afternoon when he heard the baby's coos as Running Elk bathed her in a shallow basin of sun-warmed water. "She sounds happy," he observed grudgingly. Running Elk looked up. "She is." "How will she live among us?" Swift Arrow asked. "How will she learn to be Apache if she cannot see the dance, the hunt, the weaving?" Running Elk gently lifted Naltsa from the water, wrapping her in a soft cloth. "She will learn through touch, through sound, through smell. Her world will be different from ours, but no less complete." Swift Arrow watched as the baby gripped Running Elk's finger, her unseeing eyes open and moving as if searching for his face. "Her spirit sees," Swift Arrow said unexpectedly, "perhaps more than our eyes ever will." That night, as Naltsa slept soundly in her cradleboard, Running Elk sat outside his teepee, gazing at the star-filled sky. For the first time since losing his family, he felt the weight of his grief shifting, making space for something new. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but continuing, living. "Singing bird," he whispered to his wife's spirit among the stars. "I hope you and Little Fawn approve of the path I have chosen." 4 winters passed, each season bringing new growth to the child who had been abandoned to die. Naltsa, now 5 summers old, moved through the Apache camp with remarkable confidence. Her small hands extended slightly before her, she navigated by memory, sound, and the subtle changes in air currents that told her when she approached structures or people. Her dark hair, kept in 2 neat braids by Evening Rain each morning, swung gently as she walked, and her face, though her eyes remained clouded and unseeing, was often lit by a smile that could warm the coldest heart. "Father," she called, her voice clear and bright as she approached Running Elk's teepee. "I heard your footsteps. You've returned from hunting." Running Elk marveled at her perception. Though he had made little noise, Naltza had distinguished his gait from all others in the tribe. "Yes, little one, and I've brought deer meat for tonight's meal. Did Swift Arrow go with you? His bow makes a different sound when it releases the arrow, like a bird taking flight." "Yes, he was with me." Running Elk knelt to her level, though she couldn't see the gesture. "How was your day with the women?" Naltza's fingers found his face, tracing the contours she knew so well, the high cheekbones, the straight nose, the small scar above his left eyebrow. It was her way of seeing him, of connecting. "Evening rain taught me to grind corn," she replied proudly. "I can feel when it's the right texture. And Morning Star told stories of Coyote while we worked." Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, a habit she had developed to help convey her thoughts. Running Elk smiled. Despite initial doubts, Naltza had integrated herself into tribal life with astonishing adaptability. The women had taken to teaching her their crafts, guiding her hands through the motions of basket weaving, food preparation, and leather working. Though she could not see, her fingers were nimble and her memory flawless. Most remarkable was her gift for language and stories. Naltza absorbed every tale, every song, every prayer she heard, able to repeat them with perfect accuracy after a single telling. In the evenings, tribal members often gathered at Running Elk's fire to hear the small child recite ancient legends with the cadence and gravity of an elder. Not all was easy, however. That evening, as the tribe shared the communal meal, a group of boys, slightly older than Naltza, began a game of tag nearby. Their shouts and laughter filled the air as they darted between teepees. "Come play, Naltza," one called impulsively. Naltza stood, eager to join, but stumbled over a cooking stone in her path. She fell hard, scraping her hands on the rough ground. The boys fell silent, suddenly uncomfortable. "Sorry," mumbled the one who had invited her. "I forgot you couldn't." Running Elk moved to help her, but Swift Arrow, who had been watching from nearby, reached her first. "Up you go, little warrior," he said, lifting her to her feet with unexpected gentleness. "Those boys run like frightened rabbits anyway, not worth your time." Instead of crying, Naltza tilted her head toward Swift Arrow's voice. "Will you teach me to shoot a bow someday? Father says you're the best archer in the tribe." Swift Arrow glanced at Running Elk, surprise evident in his expression. The man who had once argued most fiercely against keeping the white child now found himself strangely protective of her. "A bow requires eyes," he said, not unkindly. "But my ears can hear the target," she insisted. "I know where things are by their sounds." Later that night, after Naltza had fallen asleep, Running Elk found Swift Arrow sitting alone by the dying council fire. "She's not what I expected," Swift Arrow admitted without preamble. Running Elk sat beside him, feeding a small branch to the embers. "None of us expected her. She belongs with us now," Swift Arrow said almost reluctantly. "But the white settlers are moving closer each season. What will happen if they discover her?" Running Elk's expression hardened. "She is my daughter. She is Apache now. No one will take her from us." But even as he spoke, both men knew the fragile peace they had enjoyed could not last forever. Summer heat shimmered across the valley as Naltza, now 10 winters old, sat cross-legged outside Morning Star's teepee. Her fingers deftly wove strands of yucca fiber into a small basket while she listened intently to the elders' stories. Though her hair remained fair and her skin paler than her Apache family, in every other way Naltza had become one with the tribe. She spoke their language with native fluency, knew their ceremonies by heart, and had developed a spiritual awareness that sometimes startled even the eldest shamans. When Coyote stole fire from the fireflies, Morningstar continued her tale, her ancient voice crackling like the flame she described. He carried it in a cedar branch all the way back to the people, though his whiskers were singed and his paws burned. That is why we honor fire as a sacred gift, Naltza added, her fingers never pausing in their work. And why we thank Coyote for his sacrifice each time we light the council flame. Morningstar smiled, the deep lines of her face creasing further. You remember well, child, better than many who can see the flames with their eyes. Naltza's head tilted slightly, a gesture Running Elk had come to recognize as her way of processing complex thoughts. I see with my heart, she said simply. Father says this is a different kind of vision, but no less true. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching at speed. Naltza's head snapped toward the sound before anyone else had registered it. Riders coming, she said, rising to her feet. Many of them, not our people. Within moments, the camp erupted into activity. Warriors gathered weapons, while women hurriedly ushered children toward the protective rocks behind the settlement. Running Elk appeared at Naltza's side, his hand finding her shoulder. Go with evening rain, he instructed, his voice tense but controlled. Stay hidden until I come for you. But Naltza stood her ground, her unseeing eyes wide. They're not here to fight, Father. Their horses are tired, moving slowly. I hear a wagon wheel creaking and a child crying. Running Elk hesitated, surprised as always by the acuity of her hearing. Before he could respond, Swift Arrow approached, bow in hand. White settlers, he reported grimly. A small party. They appear to be in distress. Cloud Dancer, now nearly ancient, but still the tribe's spiritual leader, emerged from his teepee, leaning heavily on his walking stick. What do they want? We shall see, Running Elk replied, his hand still protective on Naltza's shoulder. Swift Arrow, take 4 warriors and meet them before they reach the camp. Be cautious, but do not show aggression unless threatened. As Swift Arrow and the others departed, Running Elk turned back to Naltza. You should still go with evening rain. I want to stay with you, she insisted. I can tell you what they say when they think no one is listening. My ears hear what yours cannot. Running Elk felt a familiar surge of pride mixed with concern. In her decade of life with the tribe, Naltza had indeed developed almost supernatural hearing, able to detect whispers from remarkable distances and recognize individual heartbeats of people she knew well. But her appearance, unmistakably that of a white child despite her Apache clothing and mannerisms, could complicate an already tense situation. Stay behind me then, he conceded, and speak only in our language. The settlers, when they finally entered the camp under careful escort, presented a pitiful sight. 3 men, 2 women, and 4 children, all exhausted, dehydrated, and fearful. Their wagon had broken an axle 2 days' journey south, and they had been forced to abandon most of their possessions to continue on foot. The youngest child, a girl no more than 3, whimpered continuously in her mother's arms. We seek only water and perhaps some food, their leader explained, a tall man with a weathered face and anxious eyes. We can offer payment. He held out a small pouch that clinked with coins. Cloud Dancer, through Running Elk's translation, granted their request. The Apache might be cautious of white incursion onto their lands, but their code of honor did not permit turning away those in genuine need, especially children. As water was brought and simple food prepared, Naltza remained close to Running Elk, her head tilted in that listening posture. The settlers, focused on their immediate relief, had not yet noticed the fair-skinned girl among the Apache. Until the youngest settler child, momentarily set down by her exhausted mother, toddled directly toward Naltza with the innocent curiosity of the very young. You look like me, the little girl said, reaching out to touch Naltza's braid. Every adult froze. The settler woman turned, her tired eyes suddenly widening as she truly saw Naltza for the first time. My God," she whispered. "There's a white child here." The air in the camp grew taut with tension. The settler men straightened, hands instinctively moving toward weapons they'd been asked to leave outside the camp. Running Elk stepped forward, positioning himself between Naltza and the strangers, while Swift Arrow and the other warriors shifted subtly into defensive stances. "Who is she? Where did you get her?" demanded the tall settler, his voice hardening with suspicion. Running Elk kept his expression neutral. "She is my daughter." "Your daughter?" The man's wife pushed forward, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "That's impossible. She's clearly white. Has your tribe been raiding settlements, kidnapping children?" Naltza, sensing the mounting tension, spoke in perfect Apache to Running Elk. "They are afraid, Father. Their hearts beat like trapped birds." The settlers stared at the blind girl speaking the native tongue, their confusion evident. "My God, look at her eyes," whispered one of the settler women. "The poor thing is blind." Cloud Dancer thumped his walking stick against the ground, commanding attention. "Running Elk," he said in Apache, "tell them the truth. It may be our only path to peace." After a moment's hesitation, Running Elk nodded. He addressed the settlers in their language, his voice steady. 10 winters ago, I found an infant abandoned among the rocks of the western desert. A newborn girl, left to die because she was born without sight." His gaze hardened. "Your people left her. I chose to save her." The settlers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The tall man's wife pressed her fingers to her lips. 10 years ago, that would have been the Coleman party," she said softly. "There were rumors. A couple who lost a baby during the crossing." "They didn't lose her," Swift Arrow interjected, his voice sharp with barely contained anger. "They threw her away like unwanted garbage." "We don't know that for certain," the woman protested weakly. "I was there," Running Elk said. "I found her wrapped in a blanket with only a silver cross as farewell. She had been left deliberately, placed to die alone." Naltza stepped forward then, her movement graceful despite her blindness. Though only 10, she carried herself with the dignity of someone much older. "My name is Naltza," she said, in clear, accented English that surprised even Running Elk. She had learned the language from him during their private lessons, but rarely chose to speak it. "It means, 'she who perseveres.' I am Apache." "No, child," the settler woman said gently. "You were born to white parents. You belong with your own kind." Naltza turned her face toward the woman's voice, her clouded eyes seeming to look directly at her. "And who are my own kind? Those who abandoned me to die, or those who saved me and raised me with love?" The woman fell silent, chastened by the child's wisdom. The tall settler studied Naltza with conflicted emotions crossing his face. The girl may be right. If her birth parents abandoned her, he turned to his companions. "We have our own children to worry about. We didn't come here to start trouble." "But we can't just leave her with savages," objected one of the other men. "It ain't Christian." "Look around you," the tall settler replied quietly. "These savages gave us water and food when we were desperate, and that girl speaks better than half the children back in Fort Henderson. She seems well cared for." Running Elk watched the exchange carefully. Though the immediate threat seemed to be subsiding, he knew this encounter could have far-reaching consequences. If word spread to other settlements about a white child living among the Apache, there would be those who would see it as their moral duty to rescue her, regardless of what Naltza herself wanted. The small settler child who had first approached Naltza tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, why can't she see?" "She was born that way, sweetheart," her mother answered. "Is that why they left her? Because she's broken?" The child's innocent question hung in the air, painful in its directness. Before anyone could answer, Naltza knelt to the child's level, following the sound of her voice. "I am not broken," she said gently. "I see the world differently, that's all. I hear things others cannot. I feel the wind change before a storm comes. I know people by the sound of their footsteps and the rhythm of their hearts." She reached out, her fingers finding the child's cheek with unerring accuracy. "I can see you in my own way. I know you have kind eyes and a curious mind." The little girl giggled. "How did you know?" Naltsa smiled. "Because you came to me without fear. Only the kind and curious do that." The exchange shifted something in the atmosphere. The settlers watched with softening expressions as the blind girl interacted with the child, her movements confident, her words wise beyond her years. The settlers departed the next morning, supplied with enough water and food to reach Fort Henderson. As they left, the tall settler approached Running Elk, speaking in a low voice meant only for him. "I can't promise others will be as understanding as we've been. If word spreads..." He left the warning unfinished. Running Elk nodded once. "We understand the risks." That evening, the tribal council gathered to discuss what this encounter might mean for their future. Naltsa sat just outside the circle, as was customary for one not yet of age, but her acute hearing missed nothing of the deliberation within. "We should move camp," Swift Arrow argued. "Travel north, deeper into the mountains where the white settlers rarely venture. Running from danger will not eliminate it," countered Cloud Dancer. "The whites expand like water, finding cracks in stone. Eventually, they will reach even the most remote places." "What if they send soldiers to take Naltsa?" asked Morningstar. "We cannot match their weapons." Running Elk listened to each voice, his face growing more somber as the discussion continued. When it was his turn to speak, he chose his words carefully. "I found Naltsa as an infant and claimed her as my daughter. I will defend her as any father would, but she is no longer a child who cannot speak for herself." He turned toward where she sat. "Naltsa, come forward." She rose with fluid grace, stepping into the circle. At 10 years old, she stood straight and unafraid, though all could sense her awareness of the weight of the moment. "You have heard the council's concerns," Running Elk said to her. "What are your thoughts?" Naltsa turned her face toward each elder in turn, acknowledging them with the respect she had been taught. When she spoke, her voice carried the measured cadence that had already earned her recognition as a gifted storyteller. "I am Apache in my heart and my spirit, though my skin and hair mark me as different. I do not wish to leave my people, my family." She paused. "But I would not bring danger to those I love. If my presence threatens the tribe, I will go." A murmur ran through the council at her selfless offer. Evening Rain, who had become like a mother to Naltsa, wiped tears from her eyes. "Where would you go, child?" asked Cloud Dancer gently. "To the white settlements where you know no one." "No," Naltsa replied firmly. "I would go alone into the desert if necessary. I have learned its ways. I could survive." Swift Arrow, who had once been the most vocal opponent of keeping the white infant, now rose to his feet. "No, the people do not abandon their own. We have already decided that Naltsa is Apache. We will not make the same choice her birth people made." His declaration settled like a stone in still water, ripples of agreement spreading through the council. In the end, they chose to remain where they were for the time being, but with increased vigilance and plans for swift departure should the need arise. Years passed, and the fears sparked by the settlers' visit gradually receded. Naltsa grew from a child into a young woman of 16 summers, her quiet confidence and remarkable abilities earning her a unique place in tribal life. Though still unable to see with her eyes, she had developed her other senses to such a degree that new legends began to form around her gifts. She could identify plants by their subtle scents, distinguishing medicinal herbs from poisonous ones with greater accuracy than many sighted gatherers. She could hear approaching riders from distances that seemed impossible, often naming specific warriors by the distinct rhythm of their horses' hoofbeats. Most remarkably, she had developed an intuitive understanding of weather patterns and seasonal changes that sometimes surpassed even the tribe's most experienced elders. But it was as a storyteller that Naltsa truly found her calling. Her voice, rich and expressive, could transform the simplest tale into an immersive experience. Children and adults alike would gather at twilight to hear her weave narratives that preserved the tribe's history and wisdom. She remembered every story ever told to her, every song ever sung in her presence, becoming a living repository of Apache culture. Running Elk watched her development with pride tinged with melancholy. Though never spoken aloud, both knew that the peaceful coexistence they had enjoyed could not last indefinitely. Reports from trading parties and scouts confirmed that white settlements were expanding throughout the territory. Treaties were being signed and broken with increasing frequency. One spring evening, as Naltsa and Running Elk sat outside their teepee listening to the night sounds, she reached for his hand, a gesture she rarely initiated anymore. "Something is coming, Father," she said softly in Apache. "I can feel it in the air, like the pressure before a storm." Running Elk did not question her intuition. Over the years, he had learned to trust her perceptions. "What do you sense?" Naltsa was silent for a long moment. "Change. Great change that cannot be avoided." Her fingers tightened around his. "I have been having the same dream for many nights. I am standing between two worlds, with voices calling from both sides." "What do they say, these voices?" "I cannot yet understand their words," she admitted, "but I know they are speaking of the same thing, though in different languages." 3 days later, Swift Arrow returned from a hunting expedition with troubling news. A large party of white soldiers had established a camp less than a day's ride from their valley. The tribe prepared with quiet efficiency for what might come. Women packed essential items, warriors checked weapons, and scouts departed to monitor the soldiers' movements. Though no one spoke of leaving, everyone understood they might need to abandon their camp at a moment's notice. Naltsa moved through these preparations with outward calm, assisting where her skills allowed. But Running Elk noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she tilted her head more frequently, as if straining to hear distant sounds. At night, she sat outside, face turned toward the stars she could not see, deep in thought. On the third evening after Swift Arrow's return, Cloud Dancer summoned Naltsa to his teepee. Now truly ancient, the spiritual leader rarely left his dwelling, but his mind remained clear, his wisdom undiminished. Running Elk accompanied her, entering the sacred space with reverence. Cloud Dancer's teepee smelled of sage and cedar, the air heavy with smoke from his medicine pipe. The old man sat wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening, his withered hand beckoning them closer. "I have consulted with the spirits," he said without preamble. "They speak of you, daughter of Running Elk." Naltsa knelt before him, her hands folded in her lap. "What do they say, grandfather?" "That you stand at a crossing of paths, that your presence among us has purpose beyond what we have understood." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The dream you have been having, tell me of it again." Naltsa described the recurring vision, standing between two worlds, with voices calling from both sides. "Last night," she added, "I finally understood some of their words. One side spoke of rescue, the other of destiny." Cloud Dancer nodded slowly. "The spirits have shown me that you were sent to us not only to be saved, but to save." "Save whom?" Running Elk asked. "Both peoples, those who took her in and those who cast her out." Before either could question him further, a commotion erupted outside. Swift Arrow burst into the tipi, his breathing heavy from running. "Soldiers!" he gasped. "They found our hunting party. They're coming this way, at least 20 mounted men with rifles." Running Elk rose immediately. "How far?" "Less than an hour's ride. They're following our trail." Cloud Dancer's expression remained serene despite the news. It is as the spirits foretold. The time of crossing has come. Running Elk turned to Naltza. Go with Evening Rain and the other women. Head north toward the hidden valley. But Naltza stood her ground. No, father, I must stay. Naltza, Cloud Dancer is right, she interrupted, her voice steady. I was sent to both peoples. If I run now, blood will be shed. Running Elk wanted to argue, to protect the daughter he had raised from infancy. But something in her face stopped him. In that moment, he saw not the child he had found in the desert, but a woman with a wisdom that transcended her years, perhaps even transcended sight itself. Swift Arrow, who had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience, finally spoke. What would you have us do? Surrender? They will take our lands, our freedom. No, Naltza said, but let me speak to them first, before arrows fly or rifles sound. Less than an hour later, the soldiers appeared at the edge of the camp, blue-coated men on dusty horses, rifles ready but not yet aimed. Their leader, a captain with a thick moustache and weary eyes, raised his hand to halt his men's advance. He seemed surprised by the lack of resistance, by the calm with which the Apache warriors stood their ground. Running Elk stepped forward, Naltza slightly behind him, her hand resting lightly on his arm for guidance. We mean no harm, Running Elk said in English. We have broken no treaties on these lands. The captain's eyes narrowed. We received reports of Apache raids on settlements to the south, livestock stolen, a man killed. Not by our people, Running Elk replied. We have stayed within our hunting grounds. The captain's gaze shifted, noticing Naltza for the first time. His expression changed from suspicion to shock. My God, he breathed. There's a white girl here. He turned to his lieutenant. They've got a captive. I am not a captive, Naltza said, stepping forward. Her voice carried clearly across the space between them. My name is Naltza. I was found as an infant, abandoned in the desert. The Apache took me in when my own people left me to die. The soldiers murmured among themselves, unsettled by her appearance and her words. The captain dismounted, approaching cautiously. Miss, are you being coerced to say these things? He paused, noticing her unfocused gaze. Are you blind? Yes, I was born without sight. That is why I was abandoned. Her voice held no bitterness, only simple truth. And no one coerces me. I speak of my own free will. The captain studied her with conflicted emotions crossing his face. Even if what you say is true, you should be with your own kind. We can take you to Fort Henderson. There are families there who would... These are my people, Naltza interrupted, gesturing to the Apache around her. This is my family. The girl belongs with whites, the lieutenant called from his horse. It's not proper, her living among savages. At this, Swift Arrow stepped forward, hand moving toward his knife. Running Elk raised an arm to restrain him, but tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Naltza sensed the shift, the precarious balance tipping toward violence. She moved with deliberate calm between the two groups, standing alone in the space that separated them. I was raised in two worlds, she said, her voice carrying strength despite its softness. I speak two languages, know two ways of living, and I can tell you this truth. There is more that unites these two peoples than divides them. She turned toward where she knew the soldiers stood. You call them savages, yet when I was abandoned, blind, helpless, hours old, it was an Apache who saved me, who gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Naltza turned toward the Apache, her voice shifting seamlessly into their language. And you fear these men will take your lands, your freedom. Yet among them are fathers who love their children as fiercely as Running Elk loves me. There are men who honor their word, who seek peace rather than war. She stood perfectly still, a slender figure between two forces that had shed each other's blood for generations. The wind lifted her braids slightly, and in that moment, with the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley, many would later say she seemed to glow with an inner light. "I cannot see your faces," she continued, addressing both sides now in English. "I cannot see the color of your skin, or the clothes you wear, or the weapons you carry. I can only hear your voices, your heartbeats, your breathing. And in those sounds, I find no difference between Apache and white man. I hear only human beings with the same fears, the same hopes, the same capacity for both cruelty and kindness." The captain lowered his rifle slightly. "Poetic words, miss, but they don't change the facts. We have orders to secure this territory." "And what does secure mean, Captain?" Naltza asked. "To drive these people from their ancestral lands? To kill those who resist? Will that bring true security to either side?" One of the soldiers, a young man barely out of boyhood, whispered to his companion, "She speaks better than any schoolteacher back home." "Captain Lewis," Naltza said, surprising the officer by knowing his name from his subordinate's whisper. "I have a proposition, one that could benefit both your people and mine." The captain studied her with cautious interest. "I'm listening." "Let this valley remain Apache land, recognized and respected by your government. In return, I will serve as interpreter and mediator between our peoples. I will help prevent misunderstandings that lead to bloodshed. I will teach your people about Apache ways and help the Apache understand yours." Captain Lewis frowned. "I don't have the authority to make such agreements." "Then take me to those who do," she replied steadily. "I will speak to your commanders, your government representatives. I will tell them what I have seen, that peace is possible when we truly listen to one another." Cloud Dancer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward with the aid of his walking stick. "The spirits foretold this day," he said, in halting English learned decades ago from traders. "They showed me that this child would build a bridge between our worlds." Running Elk watched with a mixture of pride and apprehension as his daughter negotiated for the future of her people. Both her peoples. He recognized the moment for what it was, the fulfillment of a purpose greater than any of them had imagined when he first found that abandoned infant in the desert. After long deliberation, Captain Lewis made his decision. "I will take your proposal to my commanding officer at Fort Henderson. Until then, there will be no action against your people so long as they remain peaceful." "And the girl?" his lieutenant asked. "The young woman," Lewis corrected firmly, "will remain where she chooses to be. It seems clear she is here by her own will." He turned to Naltza. "Though I would ask that you accompany me to speak with Colonel Richardson when he arrives next month. Your story should be heard." Naltza nodded. "I will come. Running Elk will come with me as my father and protector." The days that followed were tense but peaceful. True to his word, Captain Lewis established a small outpost at the edge of the valley, but instructed his men to maintain a respectful distance from the Apache camp. Scouts from both sides watched each other warily, but no shots were fired, no blood spilled. When Colonel Richardson arrived from Fort Henderson, Naltza and Running Elk traveled to meet with him as promised. The meeting lasted 2 days. Naltza spoke with an eloquence that impressed even the hardened military man, telling the story of her life among the Apache and outlining her vision for peaceful coexistence. Against all odds and expectations, her words found fertile ground. The colonel had lost his own daughter to disease years before and found himself moved by the blind young woman's wisdom and courage. A formal agreement was drafted, not a full treaty, but an understanding that this valley would remain Apache territory, with Naltza serving as official interpreter and mediator between the two cultures. Years passed. Naltsa's reputation grew, spreading far beyond the valley of her people. Government officials, military officers, and eventually even scholars from Eastern universities sought her counsel. She received them all with the same quiet dignity, always with Running Elk at her side. The small outpost at the edge of the valley gradually evolved into a trading post, then a small settlement where Apache and white alike came to exchange goods and, increasingly, ideas. Children of both races played together, learning each other's languages through the universal medium of childhood games. As she entered her third decade, Naltsa became known by another name as well, the storyteller. On special nights, around a central fire, she would weave tales that captured the hearts and minds of all who listened. She told the ancient Apache legends passed down from Cloud Dancer before his passing. She shared the biblical stories she had learned from the missionary's wife who had become her friend. And sometimes she told her own story of being abandoned and found, of living between two worlds and finding purpose in building bridges rather than walls. On Naltsa's 30th birthday, Running Elk, now grey-haired but still strong, presented her with a gift. Unwrapping the soft deer skin, she felt with sensitive fingers the shape of a small silver cross. "I kept this from the day I found you," he explained softly. "It seemed right that you should have it now." Naltsa traced the shape, tears gathering in her unseeing eyes. "Not to remind me of those who left me," she said. "No," Running Elk agreed. "To remind you of how far you have journeyed from that moment, of how many lives you have touched, of how the greatest abandonment led to the greatest purpose." She wore the cross thereafter on a cord, alongside the traditional Apache medicine pouch that hung around her neck, visible symbols of the duality that made her uniquely suited to her life's work. Naltsa never married, though she had no shortage of admirers from both cultures. "I am wed to my purpose," she would say with a gentle smile when asked. But she was never alone. The children of the valley, Apache and white alike, considered her a beloved aunt, bringing her wildflowers and sitting at her feet for stories. Running Elk remained her constant companion until his peaceful passing in his 82nd year. Decades later, when historians would write of the unusual peace that prevailed in this corner of the Arizona Territory, while conflict raged elsewhere, they would point to many factors: the unique geography, the economic benefits of cooperation, the progressive policies of certain officials. But those who lived there knew the truth, that peace had grown from the heart of a blind woman who could see beyond the divisions that blinded others, who had been abandoned by one world and embraced by another, and who had ultimately helped both worlds find a better way forward together.